That's entirely correct. No comment. There's no reason to use inheritance. It's 2022.
It is 2023, actually.
I'm a business manager. I care about technical decisions. OOP is a bad technical decision. My stack lets people who worked at a ramen shop writing Zig onboard in a week. OOP does not help here. Period. You don't gotta call me out that hard, Brian. Come on. Look, some of us need autocomplete. Don't make fun of us too badly for it.
I like autocomplete. Oh, so this is Theo, by the way. You can tell by the golden hair. And he is like the yin to Primogen's yang. And they seem to cross-pollinate quite a bit. Yell and complain at each other and cause commotion on Twitter. And that's good, because talking on Twitter is good for you. Twitter is a very healthy place for discussion, of course. I can't wait to put my headphones on. Anyway, object-oriented programming bad?
Shall we get started? Object-oriented programming is bad by Brian Will. This is a talk from 2016 that occasionally he posts updates to, but this is the classic. This is like one of the best OG YouTube talks ever. Sitting comfy with 1.7 million plays, every single one of which is deserved. Let's do it.
Oh wait, so I'm now watching.
When I say that this video
I'm now
is
watching a
probably the most important
stream.
it's partly because what I'm going to tell you is distinctly
I'm
a
streaming.
minority position among programmers. Probably 5% or
No, I'm on Twitch right now.
Definitively,
Yeah.
object-oriented
Live on
programming
Twitch.
is
Look at
just
me.
not a good
Look, my
idea,
green screen
and in
worked
fact,
great.
It's going to lead you astray. Maybe you'll have another 20-30% of programmers who will hem and haw and say that it has some virtues.
Target,
and some
$20.
weaknesses, and it might be better applied to some problems than others.
It's a
I'm
full
not telling you
size.
that. I'm telling you definitively, no, object-oriented programming doesn't fit any problem.
Yeah, I
and
need some
you
lights.
shouldn't take it seriously. This is almost certainly not what you were told in school. If you attended a programming course
Encapsulation.
in the last 15 years, or you read most educational
I went to the
materials about
doctor
programming,
and they gave me
the pervasive default assumption
encapsulation.
is just, well, object-oriented programming is the right way to go, and it's just a settled matter.
It was
So
hard to
I
swallow.
reiterate, this is probably going to be the most important video you watch about programming, because it's going to tell you
Most
something you're
important
not gonna
video
get
you'll
from
ever
the
watch
vast
on
majority of
programming.
other sources. First
Tell me
off,
why.
I'm going to try and make clear exactly what I'm complaining about and what I'm not complaining about.
Tell me, why did they
And then I'm going to
put
try and explain
object-oriented
what is
programming into
object-oriented
college?
programming really, because if we don't nail that down, it's almost
Because
impossible
it's easier to
criticize.
teach.
And then I'll try and account for, well, if
Is he drinking a
object-oriented programming
beer?
isn't good, why does it dominate
He's
the
definitely
industry?
drinking a
That's
beer.
kind of an important question, actually.
You know what? When you're a
And
Twitch
then
streamer
we'll
and you're
actually
at
get
home,
into
you can
what
do whatever
is
the heck you want to,
object-oriented
right?
What's bad about it? And then lastly, if I'm
It's
telling
probably
you
one of
to
those
not program in
silly
an
soda
object-oriented
pops.
style,
Oh,
then
sorry. Are
what
we
do you
supposed to be
instead?
listening?
What is the alternative?
I stopped listening
Well,
after I
procedural
saw
programming, what's that look like
object-oriented
exactly?
programming sucks. Because
So
it does,
what
and
are
that's
the
it.
problems with
I don't even
object-oriented
think.
Programming? Well, first off, the problem is really not classes per se.
Correct.
That is, I think it's actually possible to program occasionally with classes in a way that's fairly benign. I don't think it's
Okay, let's pause right there. Fairly benign. So you want to enter into a programming space which is fairly benign as your alternative?
really beneficial, but for aesthetic reasons, it might seem more pleasing to have an explicit association between certain functions and certain data types. Doing this pervasively, though, as I'll make clear, is a really bad idea. That's where everything goes wrong, is when you try and shove every function of your code, every behavior, into an association with a data type. That leads to disaster. Secondly, I don't think the problem with object-oriented programming is about performance. Very interesting case.
Correct.
And again, here I think they're overstating
I think we
the
all know
case.
that, right?
I think abstraction is actually a worthy goal. In practice, most abstractions aren't good. It takes a long, long time to develop good ones. And as I'll explain, a major problem with object-oriented programming is it does tend to produce abstractions that aren't any good. That's the real problem, not the idea of abstraction itself.
Okay.
Another interesting talk that she says.
All right. Whatever.
is
We all know being
quality
a good
structure.
coder is about
All
making
these
things
things
pretty.
you might file under code aesthetics, I think
See?
to admit actually do matter. But I think the more accurate way to spin his point is that these surface-level virtues of code are good things.
Can
and
somebody
actually
screenshot?
important.
This is the thumbnail for my video. Oh, he's
Typing
gonna
Hazard
pause
just
it.
made a really good point in YouTube chat. He likes this talk because eventually Brian does get prescriptive, and
prescriptive.
suggests solutions rather than just complaining about code being bad. Whereas somebody like Jonathan Blow just complains a whole bunch and says do better, but doesn't show you what better could or should look like. Jonathan Blow is everything I hate about programming influencer bros. Brian's on the
Jonathan Blow, that was a low blow right there.
other side of that. And I really hope that I'm building a community and a persona, whatever, that leans more Brian and
Blow?
less whatever the fuck Jonathan's doing.
Oh no, he said the F word.
Yeah.
But
Is that something? Can we
object-oriented
say that
programming
safer
and
in the office
abstraction
now?
heavy programming in general fails to deliver them. In fact, it
Dang,
provides
this guy
the
just
illusion.
looks. I'm sorry,
Why
Jonathan
did you
Blow,
say
but-
Oreos? I was already hungry.
Shh. I don't need to hear your commentary about Oreos. Although this weekend I did have an Oreo. What do you call it? Dairy Queen. What do they call their silly things? Dairy Queen menu. Treats? Cakes? This thing, the Blizzard. Oreo Blizzard. This is what past weekend.
I'm gonna go grab snacks.
Actually important, but object-oriented programming
clicked on
and
that,
abstraction-heavy programming in general fails to deliver them. In fact, it provides just the illusion of these things. Object-oriented programming is sold on the basis that it supposedly provides these things.
Thecla
Until
Inc.
particular
That
simplicity
sounds
and elegance, it
irritating.
actually makes things worse. Lastly, be clear that I'm pushing procedural programming, not necessarily functional programming, which is a different thing, as I will make clear in a moment. I happen to think that functional programming actually is the future of higher level code. I think it may actually be the default way we program at a higher level in 10 years from now or something. But there are serious efficiency problems that make functional programming not really viable in certain domains of programming. And so my message is whether your code ends up functional or imperative, that's a separate matter. Regardless, your code should be procedural rather than object-oriented. So it's a good time now to make clear exactly what are the competing paradigms of programming that we're really talking about. There are four main possibilities. Your code can first be both procedural and imperative. Procedural
just
meaning
get real
that you
meta.
have no explicit association between your data types and
Oh,
your
wait.
functions, your behaviors. And imperative meaning that we just
Hopefully this is
mutate
dry
state
enough.
whenever we feel like it. We don't have any special handling of shared state, which can cause problems as your code gets larger and larger and more complex. But in
At least for the
procedural and
picture.
imperative programming, we just cope with the problems as they arise. And you can think of this style of programming as being basically the default. It's the obvious way to get work done. So this is really how all programming was done in the early days of computers, but then starting in the 60s as programs got more and more complicated, people began thinking about, well, how do we solve this problem of shared state? Because it really can get out of hand. And so we got two major prescriptions on
shared state. Isn't that everything? Isn't everything just state, and that's why we have classes in the first place?
how to handle the problem. One of these prescriptions says that our code should be procedural, yet functional, meaning that all or most of the functions that make up our code should be pure. They should not deal with state. And so
Pure.
programming in this style, we would tackle the problem of shared state by minimizing state, trying to get rid of as much of it as possible. The other prescription people came up with said that our code should be object-oriented and imperative, and the strategy here is that we simply segregate our state. We take the state that makes up our program, and instead of sharing it promiscuously, we try and divide and conquer the problem. We package it into these encapsulated.
I do want to talk about this slide a bit. I like this framing a lot. I think that treating procedural and imperative as a default and then changing parts from there is a really clear model for where things start and how these things are different. I also really like the call out that procedural and functional's goal is to minimize state. I'm sure all of you have heard
Honestly,
me
I
rant
can't
about this
remember
all the time.
what Becca
I want my
said.
state on the DB, and I want the simplest pipe from there to my users. And that pipe is functional because the data exists in one place, the user exists on the other side of it, and I call a bunch of functions to
did.
generate the page or the content or whatever for that user. The functional pipe to that data store allows us to keep the state as minimal as possible. And I really like
I gotta have
functional
cool updates
programming
like that.
mindset and paradigms enable that. Even if functional programming itself isn't always the answer, the mindset that it encourages is why things like serverless functions make so much sense. And functions, the ideology, are as powerful as functions the concept in that way. Also, shout out Elixir.
Units that we call objects.
What do you say,
Objects
Elixir?
contain other objects.
Elixir in that way. Also, shout out Elixir.
Units that we
What did he just
Also,
say?
shout out Elixir.
No, that's not English.
Units
That was
that
not
we
a
call
word. That
objects,
was not even a
and
sentence.
objects contain other objects and so forth, and that's how we conquer the problem. And these two prescriptions are actually orthogonal to each other. We can do both the functional business to minimize the amount of state which our program deals with, and then whatever state is left over, we can then segregate into separate units of encapsulation. And in fact, I think this combination approach may actually be the ideal way to structure programs, at least in terms of high-level code, where we don't care so much about efficiency. As I'll explain, I think segregating state is actually a valid strategy up to a certain level of detail, a certain level of complexity. And so if we first minimize the amount of state which our code deals with, it then becomes a viable strategy to segregate the remaining state. You may have noticed in my definition of object-oriented programming that I said nothing about inheritance, and that is because
Are you
inheritance
serious?
is simply irrelevant. No one defends it anymore. Even people
That
who
sucks.
advocate for object-oriented programming
We
will
didn't
very
even
commonly
verify
these
it
days
then.
tell you to be very, very
Now I
careful
see
in
why
using
everyone's so
inheritance,
frustrated.
or maybe not to use it at all. And so it's not really pertinent to any argument about whether
Frick.
object-oriented programming is good or bad.
This is such a banger take, and it's entirely correct. No comment. There's no reason to use inheritance. It's 2022.
For similar reasons, I didn't say anything about polymorphism in my definition, because polymorphism, really good or bad, isn't exclusive to object-oriented programming. You can have procedural code that is polymorphic, and in fact, even more polymorphic than is typically available in most object-oriented languages. So it's really not part of the discussion as far as I'm concerned. When I complain about object-oriented programming, I'm really complaining about one idea: encapsulation. Encapsulation does not work, or as I should qualify this, encapsulation does not work at a fine-grained level, which is the core of what object-oriented
It's my prime
ideology
setup.
describes, that we need to take the state of our programs and divide and conquer that problem by chopping it up into tiny
'em.
little pieces. That is the nature of object-oriented
I don't
code,
even
and it doesn't work.
encapsulating. What are you?
It leads to
What are we
madness.
encapsulating so much?
It is the industry. Well, it's a
Yes,
programming-
because
programming.
people
But
in suits with mahogany offices say it's good. They plan and they do things on behalf of us plebes. Yes, Java. Oh my gosh, stop it. Oh yes. Thank you, Charles Petzold. All right, well, I think our day's getting started. I'm out of here. Good stream.